Hello. Although she's never seen on stage, it's fair to say that the character of Eva Smith dominates JB Priestley's first-class thriller, An Inspector Calls. And this video is going to put Eva under the literary microscope, considering how the things that she does, and perhaps more importantly, the things done to her, help to promote Priestley's argument that we need to drop capitalism, drop it like a hot snot, so that Britain can blossom into a fairer, more socialist society. Now, obviously, there's a very good reason why Eva doesn't appear in this play. You know, she's ever so slightly dead, isn't she? But Eva's absence from this play can be read metaphorically or symbolically. She's got no voice, no physical presence, and what that suggests perhaps is Eva's lack of power, her lack of status in a capitalist society. Don't forget, Eva represents, she stands as a symbol or a cipher for the working class, so her lack of power reflects that social tier's lack of power too. Of course, it's up to Inspector Goole to speak for her, to try and secure the lass, and by extension the social class she represents, some justice. Another important thing to recognise about Eva Smith is that every single member of that Act 1 dinner party, you know, Gerald and the Birlings, every single smug, self-satisfied specimen sitting at that table commits an injustice against Eva Smith. In fact, let's be more specific. They all sin against Eva Smith. They all commit an immoral, biblical sin, and these sins altogether or cumulatively help to thrust Eva on the path towards that fateful bottle of bleach. What sins have we got? We've got Mr. Birling's greed, hoys her out of work for having the gall to ask for more money. Sheila is very jealous or envious that Eva is more pretty than she is. You've got Gerald, you've got Eric. Lust governs their behaviour, perhaps Gerald as well. The sin of pride, he kind of basks in the adoration that Eva throws at him. And of course with Eric, you've got alcohol fueling his misbehaviour, so gluttony can be a sin that we can level at him there. And of course Mrs. Birling, there's a sin of pride. Why does Priestley frame the treatment of Eva Smith in terms of biblical sins? Well, I'll tell you, he's trying to present the Birlings and their ilk, their kind, as immoral, corrupt, unfit to govern. He's trying to suggest, and it serves his socialist purpose, that the current ruling class are too corrupt to stay in power. And we can juxtapose or contrast the venal, selfish bourgeoisie, as represented by the Birlings here, with the depiction of Eva Smith, who symbolises the poor. I mean, Eva's so pious and good and worthy in this play. I mean, she's practically eligible for canonisation, you know, St. Eva of Brumley. What does she do? Well, she fights for workers' rights. That's why Birling gave her the boot. And perhaps more tellingly, she refuses Eric's stolen money. And of course, this flies in the face of those toxic prejudices that characterise Mrs. Birling's thinking. You know, girls of that class, she says. Her belief is that they're all pin-eyed hussies out for what they can get. They've got no morals, according to Mrs. Birling. So the injustice of a corrupt ruling class is reinforced by the noble human decency of the poor, as represented by Eva. And of course, this shores up, this rams home Priestley's socialist message that the poor deserve a fairer deal than they're getting in 1945 and certainly in 1912, the Edwardian era, when the play is set. And this leads us on to the mangled, bust up, burnt out corpse of Eva Smith. Yeah, you do well to wince. You're supposed to wince. Priestley certainly wants the Birlings wincing and cringing, doesn't he? Because Eva dead, Eva as a steaming pile on a pathologist's slab, performs another function. Shock and guilt. When Inspector Goole utters lines like "she died in great agony" or "burnt her out of course," he's trying to shock the Birlings into realisation, force them into guilt and shame. Their actions have consequences. No, their actions have horrific consequences. Consequences that don't get much grimmer than a young lassie sucking down a bottle of bleach and dying in bowel-shredding agony. We can also, if we're so inclined, direct our literary laser vision onto Eva Smith's name. 3 gems we can pull out there. First of all, Eva comes from the name Eve. Eve, of course, is a character from the Bible, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. I think what Priestley's doing here, perhaps, is drawing a parallel between Eva Smith in Brumley and Eve in the Bible. Eve in the Bible booted out of the Garden of Eden owing to the evil influence of the serpent. Eva Smith in Brumley booted out of accommodation, jobs, owing to the evil influence, or the harmful influence perhaps, of the Birlings. What can we do with Smith? Eva Smith? Well, that captures the sense that Eva represents the common man or woman, the working class. In fact, interestingly, the word Smith means worker, as we get like blacksmiths and goldsmiths. So the name Smith then, very much tied up with ideas of work and workers. Finally, you've got Daisy Renton, the name she changes to. One of my students said, Renton, rent means to hire or loan out, as if she's a plaything of the ruling class, something that they can dispassionately use, abuse, and then get rid of when they tire of her. So, 3 gems we can pull out of Eva Smith's name. Now, this poking about in names lends itself to a very sweet contextual nugget, because Eva Smith is a label name. What that means is her name refers to her function as a representative of the working class. It labels her as a worker. And label names were a convention or feature of the morality play genre, this fun-free genre of plays, big in the Middle Ages, to offer an audience moral instruction, lessons in right and wrong. And these plays, a bit like Eva Smith, the characters often had symbolic names. You'd get like good deeds, he'd be like the virtuous goody two-shoes type. Then you'd have vice, he'd be the villain, because of course vice means sin. And then you get a guy called Everyman. As his name suggests, he represents you or I, just the normal punter watching the play, trying to avoid temptation and do the right thing. And Priestley's play is often seen as a modern morality play, cherry picking features of the morality play genre to peddle his moral message, namely that we need to dial down on the capitalist self-interest and embrace a fairer, more socialist set of values. There's no drawings on this page because even I have enough emotional intelligence to know that light-hearted cartoons aren't really the appropriate accompaniment to a discussion of Eric raping Eva. Now, it's never stated explicitly, this rape. Gerald says he's taking Eva Smith home and he says, she didn't want me to go in, but I was in that state where a chap easily turns nasty. And I'm sorry, if you're using violence to secure sex, that's rape in most people's books. Anyway, the rape alone is monstrous enough, reflects very badly on Eric, but I would urge you in an exam to also read that rape metaphorically, symbolically, because that sexual exploitation with Eric using Eva as a unwilling receptacle of his sexual urges, that reflects or mirrors or captures capitalist exploitation. You've got Eva, poor, Eric, rich. Rich violates or abuses poor. And Priestley, inspired by the ideas of Karl Marx, saw the proletariat's treatment at the hands of the bourgeoisie as exploitative. The rich benefit from the suffering of the poor. So I'd urge you to go for that deeper reading of the rape in the exam. You know it will please an examiner. Right then, we know that Inspector Goole, working as Priestley's socialist mouthpiece, is trying to convert the Birlings, get them to be kinder, more benign people, to embrace a socialist value system and put the needs of the community above the needs of the individual, the many above the few. We also know one of his tricks for doing this, Inspector Goole likes to guilt trip the Birlings, honk on about the state of Eva's mangled corpse, actions have consequences, blah, blah, blah. Problem is, the Birlings are eye-wateringly selfish people, and it's very difficult, particularly the older generation, and it's very difficult to get selfish people to do stuff that benefits others. In fact, what you have to do, good trick for life this, is sell that action as self-interest, and by golly, Inspector Goole does that. When the Birlings learn in Act 3 that Eva died with an unborn baby, Goole reveals that that child was their own flesh and blood. Gerald's child, Mr. and Mrs. Birling's grandchild. And you're probably sick to the back molars of me honking on about metaphorical significance, symbolism, tough tartar, because the death of that child is significant. It says, loud and clear that rich hurts poor, hurts rich, hurts poor. You hurt the poor, by golly, that's going to blow back in your face. Pain is cyclical. Rotation, as the great Herb Alpert said. Rich hurts poor, hurts rich, hurts poor. Capitalism then, JB Priestley saying here, ultimately harms us all. Capitalist exploitation hurts rich and poor. Ultimately, that is the message he's trying to get across to the Birlings. We're a kick at the bum, off done now, folks. We're going to carry on from last slide, looking at that idea that hurting the poor ultimately hurts the rich themselves. And Goole's final lines, he says to the Birlings, if they don't stop hurting the Johns and Eva Smiths of this world, stop abusing the poor, then they'll suffer in fire and blood and anguish. Now, here's a beautiful contextual detail we can pull from that line. That line suggests that the painful consequences of carrying on capitalist exploitation will be for the Birlings social revolution. That's the idea that the poor will rise up and stomp or destroy their bourgeois oppressors. This ain't fairy tales, folks. France 1789, Russia 1917, the ruling class learned the hard way that if you carry on subjugating the poor, that's not sustainable. The poor will take violent reparations. They'll rise up and violently rectify that social injustice. So Eva's death here, very much acting as a wake-up call, a warning to the Birlings to better treat the poor. Listen, I'm never going to ram this down your throats. Heck, if I desperately wanted to flog this book, I'd have put this advert a lot earlier in the video. At this stage of the game, it's only the most intelligent, diligent students that are still with me. This book works. It's tried and tested. It got my students last year more level 7 to 9s than I ever thought possible. It helps not just with the content of those top essays, but I think more importantly, it helps you with that academic style, that formal tone of writing that characterises the level 8 to 9 pieces. But as I say, buy it or don't buy it, it's up to you, but it does work. Right, let's sum up and get gone. For a character who doesn't even appear in Inspector Calls, Eva Smith has a remarkable impact on the narrative and the characters. She's virtuous and sinned against, a very sympathetic embodiment of the working class, Smith of course meaning worker. Her mistreatment by the Birlings enacts what Priestley sees as the flaws in the capitalist system, capitalist exploitation, and he believes that these flaws would be best addressed by embracing a more socialist value system. Eva Smith then, very much a useful tool in Priestley's endeavour to promote his political message.